So I think most of us agree that there are plenty of problems with the US educational system. So what we're going to do in this video is look at those problems. I'm going to prove to you that our education system is failing, if for some reason you think that it isn't, and then we're going to look at some possible solutions. And if you are one of those who believes that the way to fix the educational problem in the United States is just to spend more money, you may be surprised to learn that that probably won't work the way that you think it will. So perhaps you are under the impression for some reason that our education system in the United States is working and we have no problems. I am afraid that I have to first start by bursting that bubble and informing you that that is not the case whatsoever. So let's look at a hypothetical first. Suppose we have 10 graduating seniors. Out of those 10 seniors, we would ideally want all of them to be proficient. Now, proficient does not mean that they are straight A students or took all these AP classes. It simply means that they are skilled and they are competent in that field. So we'd want them to be completely proficient in math and in reading because those are very important subjects. Let's, however, take into account that not everyone is quite as skilled. So let's say maybe we could accept 7 are proficient and 3 are not quite there yet. I think we could accept that and that would be okay. In the United States, we're not even close to getting there. For example, out of those 10 students, only 4 of them are going to be proficient in reading. And when you look at math, only 3 of them are proficient in math. And actually, these numbers are rounding up. It's technically only a quarter in math, but I'm just doing it here for simplicity. So perhaps you look at that and think maybe proficiency is too high a bar to set and we should lower our expectations. I would disagree with that, but let's do that. Let's, instead of looking at proficiency, which is based on competency and skills, let's instead just look at basic achievement and see how we do there. Unfortunately, I think it actually makes the picture a lot worse. When you look at basic achievement, or more importantly, below basic achievement level, you find that out of those 10 students, 4 of them are below basic achievement in math, and 3 of them in reading. And in case you didn't catch this, I think it's really important to point out that there were only 3 students proficient in math and 4 students below basic achievement. So we have more students who are below basic level in mathematics than we do who are competent and skilled in mathematics. To me, that just screams a system that is failing, and it's problematic. Now, let's actually look at how we compare to the rest of the world, because maybe everyone else is doing as poorly as we are. Spoiler alert, they are not. So, at several points in this video, I'm going to talk about the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is basically just a group of 36 countries, and they compare academic achievement. So out of those 36 countries, the United States ranked 31st in math literacy and 23rd in science among 15-year-olds. Now, we tend to do a little bit better in reading, so we actually end up somewhere in the middle of the pack generally. The specific ranking that I'm going to use is shown right here, and it has us located at 14. And I'm using this one because it's one of the more lenient ones that I've seen where we have one of the best rankings. So I'm going to use this because most of the other ones have us even worse off, and it's just sad to look at. So I will also compare us several times to Finland. And the reason I'm doing Finland is because if you look at the other ones that are generally above Finland, and it's not always in this ranking because this is a bit subjective, but generally Finland is within the top 3, along with Japan and Singapore. Sometimes China's in there, and Hong Kong. But Finland, out of those ones, I believe is the most similar to the United States because we are both Western civilizations. They are still very demographically different than we are, but in my mind, it's a more apt comparison to compare us to Finland than it is to compare us to a country that's in Asia. So looking at this, you see how poorly we are doing. Perhaps you would think, like most people do, that we just need to spend more money in education, that we are not funding enough education. And unfortunately, it's not that easy. When you look at how much every country spends per student, you find that the United States is pretty much at the very top of the list. We spend more per student than most other countries in the world. And this is problematic because, as we just saw, we do not even get close to ranking as far as academic achievement. So we spend more than a lot of these countries, and we have much worse academic outcomes than they do. Just to go along with the same table that we just saw, the following countries spend less than we do, sometimes significantly less, and they have much better academic outcomes than we do. Japan, Finland, UK, Canada, Netherlands, Ireland, Poland, and Germany. So out of the ones that I did not mention, the only one that is on that table as well as on this graph is Denmark. And they're the only ones who spend more than we do and are still better than we are, but they only spend a little bit more than we do because they're the next step up. So if you look at this, in my mind, that is telling me that it's not just a funding situation, that there's something else going on, because we fund more than most of these countries, but we do significantly worse than a lot of them. So something else is going on here. Specifically, comparing us to Finland, we spend about 20% more than they do. But again, they do much better than we do academically. So it's not just a money issue. Now, speaking about money, it is important to recognize that we have one problem that those other countries perhaps do not, and that is because we are so much bigger. That problem is localization. What I mean by that is a lot of the funding that goes to our schools and our school districts come from some form of local revenue, including property tax. And what that means is that if you live in a suburb and people in the suburb tend to be well off, then the schools you go to will probably receive more funding on average per student than the schools that would be in inner city Chicago, for example. So for lack of a better term, I will call the schools that are in impoverished area poverty schools, and then the other schools would just be regular schools. When you compare the regular schools to the poverty schools, you find that the teachers in the poverty schools tend to have less experience, less certification, and less qualifications than teachers in regular schools. You also find that those teachers tend to have about twice the turnover rate. So what that means is the schools that are struggling the most tend to get the teachers who are least ineffective and least experienced, and as those teachers gain experience, they go to other schools. And this is a big problem because those are the schools who need the most help, and they're getting the least inexperienced teachers. And part of this is a funding issue. So one possibility is perhaps making funding for schools a little bit less local and a little bit more at the state level. And again, this is just a possible solution. It's certainly not going to fix anything, but it is a problem that we have that we need to look at in the United States. Furthermore, another metric we can use and compare ourselves to the rest of the world is how long the students spend in a classroom per year. Now, you might think that the more time they spend in a classroom means that they tend to do better academically, but we actually see that is not the case. Once again, the United States, we are now highlighted in red, is among the very top of this list. So our students spend more in the classroom per year than just about every other country in the world. Now, the countries that spend more than us are countries like Latvia, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Costa Rica. And not to discredit those countries, but they are not the countries that tend to do very well academically. So we are not in line here with what the other countries do. Now, to kind of cement this idea a little bit further, let's look at just this bar graph because it's easier to see. You find that the United States spends, on average, 981 hours in the classroom per year. Compare that to the OECD average of 694 hours. That's about a 300-hour difference, which corresponds to 12 and a half full days or 56-hour school days. To me, that is a pretty significant difference. As a matter of fact, when you compare us to Finland, we spend about 30 to 40% more time in school than students in Finland do. I have not been able to find any study that can directly correlate and show that the more time you spend in school, the better the students are academically. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of studies that show that decreased time in schools leads to increased productivity in the time that you are in the school. So perhaps since the average time in school is about 6 hours, we could drop that down to 4, maybe 5 hours. That would not only free up some of our budget because we'd spend less money on that, but it would also probably increase our students' productivity the time they're in schools because lecturing is not an effective way to learn. If you're sitting in a classroom for 50 minutes, 5 or 6 times a day, you are not going to learn very well. So something needs to change, and this is a possible solution as well. You also often hear about the problems with standardized testing. Now, I only want to get into a couple of really quick bullet points about this, first and foremost being that they cost money, obviously. They actually cost $1.7 billion a year. Now, in the grand scheme of things, comparing to our federal budget, that's not a whole ton of money, but if you were to take that money and distribute it elsewhere, it would probably do a lot more good than it does with the standardized testing. Part of the problem with them is that it doesn't really measure how well the students learn, it simply measures how well they can do on this specific test. And part of the problem is because you have teachers or schools who want to show that they're doing well and they're teaching their students properly, so they will tend to teach to the test and teach what the students need to learn to do well on the test, but not the material and not problem-solving methods. And this is problematic because it may show that a student does really well on standardized testing, But then those very same students may not even be proficient in mathematics and reading, and they may be below basic achievement level, as we saw earlier. So standardized testing is not a good metric to see how well students are doing. Furthermore, since about 2001, the No Child Left Behind policy, there has been an increased effort and emphasis in standardized testing, and it hasn't helped since then. As a matter of fact, our standing on the world stage as far as academics go, in many cases has decreased in the past 2 decades. So if we are putting all this time and effort into standardized testing and it has not been shown to work, I do not understand why we continue to do so. Now, I'm not saying that we need to completely eliminate all standardized tests because they do have their place. At least for the moment, the ACT and the SAT are both part of the standardized testing name, and they are pretty vital when it comes to college admissions. But at the very least, we could decrease how many standardized tests we do, which would not only save money, but they're not effective, so I don't really know why we do them anyway. So this is one that some of you, if you're on the right or if you're conservative, may be a bit surprised about. Us on the right tend to hear that the unions are a big problem, and if we just get rid of the unions, then everything would be fine. I am not convinced of that. I've done some research on it. I need to look into it a bit more, but I've not found evidence to suggest that teachers' unions are a big part of the problem whatsoever. There is, however, one big negative impact that these unions have, and that is they make it more difficult to fire the ineffective and bad teachers. And both unionized and non-unionized teachers tend to agree with that statement. So what basically happens if you have a teacher who is part of a union, and even if they're shown to be an incompetent or a bad teacher, because they are paying their dues to the union will tend to protect them. And again, this is not me just saying that all unions are bad. It's just saying that's how it runs because they need to have people paying into the union and paying their dues. So it'll make it more difficult for that unionized teacher, even if they're a bad teacher, to be fired. Now we get to the point that I'm sure you've been waiting for, and this is teacher salary. You often hear in the United States that teachers are both underpaid and overworked. And we already did see that on average, students spend more time in the classroom in the United States than they do in most other countries. So it is certainly true that teachers are worked more here than they are compared to other countries. When you look at the data that I have up here, you see that the United States actually tends to pay teachers fairly well when it comes to just comparing salary across different countries. As a matter of fact, we are about 7th when it comes to best paid countries for teachers. So you may look at this and think that we're doing okay, and that's initially what I thought. But it does not tell the whole story. The problem is we shouldn't just compare salary of teachers in these countries. We should compare the salaries they could also get if they went into different fields. What I mean by that is the better metric is to compare the salary of teachers with similarly educated workers. So in the United States, that basically means we take a teacher, we compare their salary to someone else who has a bachelor's degree. In doing so, you find that teachers earn, on average, 67% of other individuals with bachelor's degrees, which compared to the OECD average of 79%, we are 13 points below. So we're doing pretty poorly when it comes to teacher salary. And part of the reason this is important is because if you have someone who aspires to be a teacher and that's what they want to do, and they may be really good at it, but they recognize how little the pay is compared to other fields, they're going to go into something else. That actually happened to me. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a high school math teacher. That was my aspiration and my goal. But talking to some of the high school math teachers that I really looked up to, they kind of informed me that I shouldn't major in just education or math education. Instead, I should major in something a bit more general like math to leave my options open. And they told me this because they wanted to make sure that if I didn't want to become a teacher, I wasn't stuck in that career that doesn't pay very much. So it's important here to recognize that you're not going to get the best quality teachers unless the salary is a little bit more competitive. Now, this does not necessarily mean that we have to increase taxes to pay for all of these teachers, because as we already looked at, there are several different ways we can already cut costs, including getting rid of standardized testing, shrinking the school days, and things of that nature. So this is something, however, that we need to look at and need to address. That being said, I do not think the number one solution should just be to start paying teachers more. There is something that I think is more important that does directly link to this, and that is a better way to measure teacher effectiveness. So the National Council on Teacher Quality has been studying this very thing for quite a while, and they put out in 2015 a 103-page report talking about some of the different ways you can measure teacher effectiveness and how different states have been doing that. I don't want to get into that too much, but there are two main points that they brought up. First and foremost is that one really good way to measure teacher effectiveness that is oftentimes overlooked is referring to your students and having them evaluate the teachers. Now, one of the reasons you may not want to do this is because when you're looking at middle school and high schoolers, you sometimes have students who really don't care about anything, they don't take anything seriously. So if given the option, they may say that school is the worst and teachers are horrible and everything in life sucks. And that is a possibility. But I feel like the feedback you would get from the students who actually do care would be very beneficial. And that's what they argue here, that too often times that aspect of measuring teacher effectiveness is overlooked, and that is not something that we should disregard. Another thing they mentioned, which is very important, is once you find your effective teachers, you need to link that to teacher pay somehow as an incentive. For instance, in 2015, they found that only 7 states actually did that. In 43 states in the United States, your salary as a teacher was not directly tied to teacher evaluation results. So what that basically means is there's not that much incentive for you as a teacher to improve on how effective you are. Because if you're not getting any increased compensation, then it makes it more difficult for you to want to be better. And I feel like this is just common sense. If you're working at a job and you know that no matter how hard you work, you will not get any sort of promotion, you won't get recognized for your hard work as far as a pay increase, you're less likely to work as hard as you can and put yourself out there like that. So this is one area that I think directly does tie to what we talked about with teacher salary, is that upon measuring teacher effectiveness, finding the teachers who are more effective, they should get a pay increase, because that would make teaching a more competitive area, which would give us better teachers. So I think that this is perhaps the most important thing that we can do to improve our educational system. And it's what the National Council on Teacher Quality also says. This is one area we've been neglecting for a while, and we need to work on it. Thank you for watching. As always, all the claims that I've made are down in the sources below, so feel free to check them out. And I'd like to hear your feedback. Out of the things that I mentioned, what do you think would be the most important ways that we can improve our educational system in the United States? And is there anything that I missed that you feel would also be important? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, comment. Basically just let YouTube know that you appreciate the content that I'm doing, and I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.